Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan here on Monday. I've got a lot to get to about this past weekend, which saw If debut at number one at the box office. But as promised, when I said I was going to start using estimated numbers, I want to go back to last week's show quickly and do a couple of updates on those numbers because Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, as I mentioned on last week's show, actually came in a little bit higher than the estimates had. So let's see where that puts it on a couple of different lists. The order didn't change here, but this is where it looks as far as Planet of the Apes openings since 2000, and you see right there in the middle is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. The final number is right around $58.4 million. So it comes in over $2 million ahead of War for the Planet of the Apes. This is something that did flip, though. It's a very close race between Kung Fu Panda 4 and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes for the third highest grossing domestic opening weekend of the year. And that uptick in final numbers gave Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes that number 3 spot. So Dune Part 2 with the biggest opening of the year so far at $82.5 million, followed by Godzilla Kong the New Empire. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes at number 3 with $58.4 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 at $57.9 million, and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire in 5th place at just over $45 million. These are what the numbers looked like as far as the best worldwide Hollywood debuts of the year, because the international numbers went up as well. Godzilla Kong the New Empire still number 1 with $194 million. Dune Part 2 in 2nd place at $182.5 million. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes settled out at $130.9 million, followed by Kung Fu Panda 4 at $80.2 million, and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire at $61.4 million. Looking at the biggest theater count changes last weekend, Boy Kills World did not report their grosses when I did the show, and it turns out they lost the most theaters of any movie for that weekend. 1,484 theaters gone, down to just 40 total theaters, which means the movie essentially crashed out of release in just 2 weekends. This really was not a successful film theatrically. All of the rest of the movies stayed the same, except they all just got bumped down one position. This is another one that's going to get updated fairly often. The per theater averages, the top 3 were the same. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes at number 1, followed by Wildcat and I Saw the TV Glow. But there were 2 films that reported after I did the final numbers. Gasoline Rainbow came in 4th place, making $6,241 in just 1 theater. That's the latest film from the Ross brothers about a group of friends on a road trip. And then a 4K restoration of The Lavender Hill Mob, also playing in 1 theater, brought in $5,524. That is a 1951 British Alec Guinness classic. These are the kind of movies that tend to report a little bit later, and as I said, if they're not on my chart this week when I have the estimates in, I will go back and correct them for the previous week. As far as the limited release films for May 10th through the 12th, the only change here was that Wicked Little Letters actually performed much better than estimated. It went up to 3rd place with $215,000 in 520 theaters. Those were the same 5 films that I reported, just the order changing a bit. And then finally, this wasn't a reporting error as far as the numbers available. This was just a bad math error. I forgot to update some numbers. So this is the actual accurate worldwide chart for May 10th through the 12th. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes at $130.9 million. And then I got all the rest of these wrong. I forgot to update them from the international side. So The Fall Guy made $23.1 million, a 57.1% drop. The Garfield Movie at $11.8 million, a 46.4% drop. Twilight of the Warriors walled in 4th at a 57.4% drop. And Challengers in 5th with just over $9 million and a 41.1% drop. So those are all the updates from last week's show, and that's part of the deal when I do the show here on Mondays is I will go back and do corrections as needed. But let's look at the box office weekend that just happened. As I mentioned, If was the number 1 opening film at $35 million, which lands right in the middle of where the original projections had it at $40 million, and then where some analysts thought it was going to open early in the weekend at $30 million. It picked up steam as the weekend went on, although it still couldn't hit those initial projections. And the reason I'm calling it, I think, as I put on the thumbnail, an iffy opening is because there are a lot of variables here. It is an original intellectual property, which is something we'll look at in a few minutes. And so it's good that it opened to $35 million because it's not banking on a familiar franchise, although a lot of people have said that it bears a striking resemblance to a television show that aired some time ago. And honestly, if this had carried a $70 million budget or even $80 million budget, then this would be a much better opening. But If reported reportedly carried a $110 million budget. When you add the promotion, that's probably closer to a $200 million investment. And so that $35 million opening doesn't look great in that context compared with some soft international numbers. Reviews weren't great, but the cinema score was good. That A cinema score and the fact that it picked up steam over the weekend is a good sign that audiences liked it a lot more than critics. The big question is, what is it going to do in the marketplace from here? We have the Garfield movie opening this weekend that's going after the family market, and then the summer season just picks up steam after that. With the budget where it is, IF is going to have to really hang around and hold strong weekend to weekend in order to put up a good domestic number, especially if you're making up for perhaps an underperformance in overseas and international markets. So I think the jury is still very much out on IF. There are a lot of X factors, and this is really one of those things where we can't make that final judgment based on opening weekend. The second weekend, this coming weekend with Memorial Day and everything else, that will help to give us a clearer vision on where the movie is going. But yeah, still very much undetermined about the future prospects of IF. In second place was Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which dropped 55.5% in its second weekend for a $26 million total. Its domestic total is now at over $100 million. That's an okay result. That may bear a little bit more of the cinema score that we were talking about, that B cinema score, even though the audiences seem to like it a little bit more as far as word of mouth than the cinema score would indicate, and the reviews were stronger. A 55.5% drop when you don't have a direct competitor. I wouldn't consider IF to be a direct competitor. That might indicate that perhaps the legs are a little weak on this. Again, it just depends on how it weathers the storm in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Furiosa, which opens this weekend, is a movie, I would say, that is in direct competition with the audience for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So let's see how it does in weekend number 3. In third place was The Strangers, Chapter 1, which actually opened stronger than anticipated at just over $12 million. We'll look at horror openings in 2024 in just a minute. In fourth place was The Fall Guy, which dropped 39.3% in its third week for an $8.4 million total. Its domestic total right now is at $62.9 million. It's looking unlikely that it's going to hit $100 million domestic, although it could still hang around the box office for several weeks. Challengers is in the top 5 in its fourth week with a 32.8% drop and a $2.9 million weekend. Its domestic total is now at $43.5 million. I mentioned the fact that IF is an original intellectual property, meaning it's not directly based on a true story or any kind of pre-existing movie or whatever, and it is the highest opening intellectual property of 2024 at $35 million. Civil War is in second place at $25.5 million, then Argyle at $17.4 million, The Beekeeper at $16.5 million, and Challengers at just over $15 million. Let's take a look at the Planet of the Apes franchise, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes stays where it was last week. When we look at domestic box office, it is the 5th highest grossing film, about $45 million right now behind the domestic total of War for the Planet of the Apes, and I think that it would be a symbolic victory at a minimum if it were to outgross the last film in the previous trilogy. When we look at the franchise adjusted for inflation, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes has now jumped over the last 3 films in the first series of films. Escape, Conquest, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes is now the 7th highest grossing Planet of the Apes film of all time. It's got about another $40 million to go before it can leap over the first Planet of the Apes sequel, which was Beneath the Planet of the Apes back in 1970. The Strangers Chapter 1 I mentioned opened higher than expected, and as of right now, it is the best horror opening domestically of 2024. If it sticks to these estimates at $12 million, it's about $200,000 ahead of Night Swim right now. It is conceivable that the actual number comes in below that, but as of right now, The Strangers Chapter 1 at number 1, Night Swim opening at number 2 with $11.7 million. Then we have Abigail in third place at $10.2 million, Imaginary in fourth place at $9.9 million, and The First Omen in fifth place at $8.3 million. Given the relative strength of the horror genre in the last few years, I think it's been a pretty weak beginning of 2024. Even though you have several movies here in double-digit openings, we don't have those big franchises like a Scream or an Evil Dead or some of the big horror openings that we've seen in the last few years. Not so much this year. Let's look at numbers 6 through 10 for this past weekend. The Amy Winehouse biopic Back to Black did not make a big splash here in the US. It opened in the UK a little while ago. There was some really bad buzz. Reviews weren't very good. And it is there at number 6 with just $2.8 million. Tarot in its third week comes in 7th place, a 41% drop. It made $2 million for a domestic total of $15.4 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire spends an 8th week in the top 10 with a $1.7 million total and a $194.4 million domestic total. Remember, it's got to get to $200 million if it wants to jump over Godzilla, 2014's Godzilla, to be the highest grossing legendary MonsterVerse film. I'm not quite sure it's going to get there. In 9th place was The Blue Angels, a new documentary from IMAX. They're branching into original documentaries now, which is kind of where IMAX started before they started showing movies. $1.3 million on a very limited release. We'll look at the limited release numbers in a little bit. In 10th place is Unsung Hero. As of right now, it's very close with Civil War for that number 10 spot. So if it does flip-flop, we'll talk about it next week. But as of now, Unsung Hero in that 10th spot with just over $1 million in its 4th week of release and a domestic total of just over $19 million. We had 4 movies as of the estimates that dropped out of the top 10. Kung Fu Panda 4 is out after 10 weeks. As of right now, Civil War is out of the top 10 after 5 weeks. Abigail is out after 4 weeks. And the 25th anniversary re-release of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is out after 2 weeks. And looking at the movies that have had the longest runs in the top 10 this year, these are 2024 releases, not movies that carried over from 2023. Kung Fu Panda actually had the longest top 10 run of the year so far at 10 weeks. Dune Part 2 was in the top 10 for 9 weeks, so it comes in 2nd place. The Beekeeper and Godzilla Kong: The New Empire both are in the top 10 for 8 weeks. If Godzilla Kong: The New Empire can stay in that top 10 for one more week, then it'll tie Dune for 2nd place. And then we have Bob Marley: One Love in 5th place, which was in the top 10 for 6 weeks. As far as the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, this is one of the biggest theater drops that I can remember. Star Wars Episode 1, the 25th anniversary, dropped 2,370 theaters. It remains in just 330 theaters. We knew that this was a limited run, but it's still weird to see a movie drop that many theaters in 1 week. Civil War dropped over 1,000 theaters, about half of its remaining theaters. It's still in 1,112, so it's still in wide release, but just barely. Abigail dropped 947 theaters. It's now out of wide release with 694 theaters left. Tarot dropped 770. It's now in 2,334. And Godzilla Kong: The New Empire dropped 758 theaters. It's still playing in 1,773 theaters, although we have a couple of big releases coming up this weekend in the Garfield movie and Furiosa, so you can probably expect some movies to take heavier theater count drops as the multiplexes make way for these 2 new big movies. This is what I call our road to recovery, if it is ever going to be a recovery. The blue line is the box office weekend average for 2015 through 2019. The red line is the box office weekend average for 2021 to 2023. And the dotted black line would be our weekend totals for every week this year. And you can see that we're actually fairly well above where we have been the last few years, but still well below where we were on the blue line. The highest performing film for the 2021 to 2023 window was the opening of Fast X last year. The highest performing film for 2015 through 2019 was the opening of Deadpool 2 back in 2018. You can see there on the graph, though, that there is a big spike that corresponds with the Memorial Day weekend. So we'll see if Furiosa and Garfield can help us to keep pace with what we've been doing the last few years. And the headline for the beginning of this year, and we're coming to the end of May almost, as hard as it is to believe, is that this has been a very lackluster year for the box office for movie attendance. And so I wanted to take a look at the longest number of days from January 1st that the box office did not have a $100 million opener. We don't have a film yet this year that's opened to $100 million domestically. And really the question is, how normal is that? How normal is it for us to get to Memorial Day almost and have no $100 million openers? So let's look at the longest streaks. This is from 2010 to 2024, excluding, of course, 2020, which is a very anomalous year. what is the longest gap between the beginning of the year and our first $100 million grosser? Well, you can see at number one is a year that really deserves an asterisk, which is 2021. There were 351 days that went by in the year before the first $100 million opener, which was Spider-Man No Way Home. But keep in mind that theaters weren't really even on their feet until summer that year. Still, though, it does make the chart because there were some box office movies that performed as usual. In second place was 2011. It was 196 days before July 15th when Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 opened to what I think was the biggest box office opening weekend at that time. Then we have 2014, 178 days went by until June 27th when Transformers Age of Extinction opened to over $100 million. And then we have this year, 140 days have passed by so far, and this is an ongoing streak. We would need to get to June 27th to tie 2014 for that third longest streak. The most likely movie, I think, to break the streak would be Inside Out 2, unless Bad Boys Ride or Die really overperforms. Then we have 2013, Iron Man 3 came out 123 days into the year. 2015 with Furious 7, it came out in April, 93 days into the year. Then 2012, 83 days into the year when The Hunger Games opened. 2017 with Beauty and the Beast, 76 days into the year. 2019 with Captain Marvel, which opened 67 days into the year. 2010 with Alice in Wonderland, which opened in early March, just 64 days into the year. The Batman, which opened on March 4th, 2022, which was 63 days into the year. Then 2023, last year, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, 47 days into the year. That ties Black Panther, which also came out 47 days into the year back in 2018. And then Deadpool, which brought the earliest $100+ million opener from 2010 to 2024, just 43 days into the year on February 12th. And the situation looks a lot different when you adjust for inflation. Adjusted for inflation, 2021 still has that number one spot, but it gets there a little bit quicker because adjusted for inflation, Venom: Let There Be Carnage actually opened to over $100 million on October 1st. So that's just 273 days into the year instead of getting into December with Spider-Man No Way Home. But we come in second place adjusted for inflation at 140 days. In 2011, Fast 5 came in over $100 million adjusted, so that's 118 days. In 2014, Captain America: The Winter Soldier came in over $100 million adjusted, so that's 93 days. The Hunger Games and Captain Marvel both stay where they were. In 2013, believe it or not, adjusted for inflation, Oz the Great and Powerful was the first $100 million opener of the year, just 66 days in. Then Alice in Wonderland and The Batman where they were. Logan, adjusted for inflation, opened to over $100 million in 2017, which brings that number down to 61 days. Then we have Black Panther, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and Deadpool where they were. And then in 2015, American Sniper, and I'm counting this as an opening because it was in very limited release. This was a wide opening weekend, just 15 days into the year, January 16th. American Sniper opened to over $100 million adjusted and has by far the shortest gap between the beginning of the year and the first $100 million opener. So a lot of work to do here domestically at the box office. Let's look at what the weekend looked like outside the domestic marketplace. At the top 5 international numbers, these are all markets outside of the US and Canada. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes remains at number 1 at $40.6 million. If comes in second place at $20 million internationally. I mentioned it was a bit soft so far. It actually opened, though, a week earlier in some countries than it did here in the US, including in France, where apparently the movie is called Blue and Company, which I think would be even more confusing when you actually see the movie because, I guess it's about Blue and Company. In third place is the Garfield movie, which continues its international run leading up to its domestic release this weekend, another $10.3 million. Twilight of the Warriors Walled In comes in fourth at $8 million, and then The Fall Guy comes in fifth at $7.1 million. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with the domestic numbers, we get our top 5 films worldwide. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes repeats at the top of the list with $66 million. It's about a 50% drop from last weekend, so internationally it held a little bit better than it did domestically. Because IF was only open in a handful of markets, it took a big jump up percentage-wise this weekend, 1,427.8% for a $55 million worldwide opening. The Fall Guy drops 32.4% at $15.6 million. The Strangers Chapter 1, most of this is that domestic opening, comes in fourth at $13.7 $12.7 million. And then the Garfield movie, which is rolling out to some other international markets and did this past weekend, drops just 12.7% with that $10.3 million total. We have so many more box office numbers to break down, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsors for this week's show. This video is brought to you by Miracle Made. When you're cleaning the house, you always focus on the places that you know are the dirtiest. But did you know that traditional bed sheets can have more bacteria than a toilet seat? Well, since you can't unlearn that, you'll be happy to know that Miracle Made offers a whole line of self-cleaning antibacterial bedding that prevents up to 99.7% of bacterial growth and requires up to 3 times less laundry. Miracle Made sheets aren't just self-cleaning, they're also self-cooling, using silver-infused fabrics inspired by NASA to keep you at the perfect temperature. I have them on my bed right now, and I can tell you that I've been getting great sleep without overheating, which is usually a problem for me as the nights get warmer. Go to trymiraclemade.com/Dan to try Miracle Made sheets today, and whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code Dan at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/Dan and use the code Dan to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/Dan to treat yourself. Thanks to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. This episode's brought to you by The Perfect Jean. We all like to be comfortable, especially during the summer, but let's be honest, it's a small step from wearing sweatpants around the house to rocking your pajamas in public. But now you don't have to choose between comfort and style with The Perfect Jean. These aren't just another pair of your stiff cardboard jeans, they're great-looking, perfect-fitting jeans that are stretchy as a kangaroo's pouch and hug your assets in all the right places. With 6 fits from skinny to thick, waist sizes from 26 to 50, and lengths from 26 to 38, they've got the perfect size for you. I'm not known as the most stylish guy to begin with, and I've always had trouble finding jeans that fit. They're either too short or too tight in places you don't want your jeans to be too tight, unless you're like a 70s rock star. But the Perfect Jean is a great name because they fit me perfectly. They're comfortable and stretchy, and they have huge pockets that don't look bulky. It's finally time to stop crushing the baby makers in uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectjean.nyc. Fans of the show get 15% off your first order plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use code DAN15 at checkout. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectjean.nyc with promo code DAN15. After you purchase, they're going to ask where you heard about them, so please support the show and tell them that Dan sent you. F your khakis and get The Perfect Jean. So Memorial Day is this weekend here in the US, which is the official quote-unquote beginning of the summer, but the summer box office is already a few weeks old, and let's look at the box office chart so far. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is the #1 film of the summer to this point at $101.2 million. The Fall Guy is in second place at $54.5 million. If opens in third place at $35 million. Then we have Tarot in fourth at $13.4 million. Episode 1's re-release in fifth at $12.9 million. Then The Strangers Chapter 1 opening in sixth place. Back to Black opening in seventh place. And then because this chart counts all wide releases, Not Another Church Movie's in eighth place, even though it's only made about $500,000. We talked, by the way, last week about the fact that it was close to being on potentially one of the worst opening weekends for a movie that was in wide release. It did not make that chart. The estimates came in about where they were. So it wasn't one of the 5 worst ever for its scale, but it still was one of the worst ever. Looking at my predictions for the summer so far, still only one of them has opened, which is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Right now, it is the #1 movie of the summer. I predicted it to be the 5th highest grossing movie of the summer. However, 2 of my other picks both opened this upcoming weekend. I picked Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, to be the 6th highest grossing film of the summer, and I picked the Garfield movie to be number 8. I'm starting to think maybe I underestimated Garfield, but we'll see what happens. So we will start tracking a lot more movies on this chart in the weeks to come. Let's take a look at some of these specialty charts, and we'll look first at the per theater averages. And of course, this will get updated if other movies report when final numbers come in today on Monday. At number 1 is Babes, which made $14,277 per theater in 12 theaters. Babes was directed by Pamela Adlon. It was co-written and co-starring Ilana Glazer, who plays a single woman who gets pregnant and seeks the help of her married friend, played by Michelle Buteau. In second place is If, which brought in $8,661 per theater in each of its over 4,000 theaters. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is also in over 4,000 theaters and brought in $6,380 per theater. The Blue Angels documentary in IMAX was only in 227 theaters, but brought in $5,774 per theater. And then The Strangers Chapter 1 opened around $12 million, but had a higher per theater average because it was in 2,856 theaters versus 3,000 or 4,000. It made $4,202 per theater. Looking at the top films in limited release that would be 1,000 theaters or fewer, The Blue Angels leads the way at $1.3 million in 227 theaters. Then I Saw the TV Glow, which had a big expansion to 469 theaters and brought in just over $1 million. I reviewed I Saw the TV Glow right here on the channel if you want to check that out. In third place is the Indian film Shinda Shinda No Papa, which was in an unknown number of theaters in its second weekend, but brought in around $339,000. Oh boy, I'm going to do my best here. In fourth place is another film from India. It's a Malayalam language film called Guruvayur Ambalanadayil, which was in an unknown number of theaters and brought in just over $280,000. Save your comments. I'm sure I didn't do that justice. And then in fifth place was Babes in 12 theaters, which brought in $171,000. Looking at the 2024 annual domestic box office, so this is all movies that opened in 2024, Dune Part 2 remains number 1 at $282.1 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire maintains a narrow lead over Kung Fu Panda 4. They're both right around $192.6 million. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire for now is at number 4. That's going to change next week. It's at $112.1 million. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes jumps up 4 spots on the list to number 5. It's at $101.2 million. Bob Marley: One Love drops 1 spot to number 6. Mean Girls drops 1 spot to number 7. Civil War stays at number 8. It's just barely ahead of The Beekeeper. It may even fall behind depending on estimates, but it will eventually outgross The Beekeeper. The Beekeeper drops 2 spots to number 9, and The Fall Guy is there at number 10. Looking at the 2024 worldwide box office, Dune Part 2, of course, is at number 1 at $710.6 million, followed by Godzilla Kong: The New Empire at $561 million. I am tracking its progress versus Kong Skull Island. It's less than $10 million away from overtaking it worldwide as the highest grossing legendary MonsterVerse movie. Kung Fu Panda 4 is at number 3 at $533.4 million. Then we have China's YOLO, Pegasus 2, Article 20, and Boonie Bear's Time Twist at numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7. Although Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is coming in to break up that group, it enters the chart at number 8 at $237.5 million. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire drops 1 spot to number 9. Bob Marley: One Love drops 1 spot to number 10. And The Beekeeper drops off the 2024 overall worldwide top 10. There is an update to make to the worldwide box office 365-day chart. So it's basically the top grossing movies for the last 365 or 366, because it's a leap year, days from May 20th, 2023 to May 20th, 2024. Fast X has rotated out. It used to be the 365-day Hall of Fame, but it's more and more common that movies stay on this for a full 365. So I think I may have to close the doors to that Hall of Fame. Still, though, it was on here for a full year. So Dune Part 2 moves up to number 3. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse moves up to number 4. Wonka moves up to number 5. The Little Mermaid moves up 1 spot to number 6, but it's going to rotate off this chart next week because it opened last Memorial Day weekend. Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning moves up to number 7. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire moves up to number 8. China's No More Bets moves up to number 9. And Kung Fu Panda enters the chart at number 10. So those are now your 10 highest grossing movies worldwide over the last year. Before we wrap things up and look ahead at this Memorial Day weekend, I also like to take a chance to look behind at a weekend in box office history. And we're not going to go too far back, but it's a little further back than you may think, because we're going to go back to May 15th through the 17th, 2015. That's right. It was the opening weekend of Mad Max Fury Road. 9 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been almost a decade since that film. Of course, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, opens this upcoming weekend, but Mad Max Fury Road was not the #1 movie the weekend that it opened. Pitch Perfect 2 opened to $69.2 million in that #1 spot. It eventually made $184.2 million. Mad Max Fury Road opened in second place at $45.4 million. It eventually ended up at $153.6 million domestically. In its third week, Avengers Age of Ultron dropped 50% and made $38.8 million. Its total up to that point was already at $372 million. It ended up at $459 million domestic. In fourth place was Hot Pursuit, which dropped 59% in weekend #2. It's sort of one of these things is not like the other. Not a big box office success amongst a group of box office successes. Its total through 2 weeks was at $23.4 million. It eventually ended up at $34.5 million. And then in fifth place was Furious 7 in its 7th week of release, dropping 32.5% for another $3.6 million. It was almost out of gas. It had made $343.7 million to that point and ended up at $353 million domestically. So this weekend is Memorial Day weekend here in the US, which is traditionally the kickoff to summer. I don't think that we're going to see a movie that enters the all-time Memorial Day weekend top 5 openers, but let's take a look and see what those movies are just for fun. Before a couple of these movies, especially Top Gun Maverick was added, this was an historically bad list, but Top Gun Maverick kind of redeems it. It is the highest grossing Memorial Day opener of all time at $160.5 million, unadjusted for inflation. In second place is Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End at $153 million, then Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull at $126.9 million, and X-Men The Last Stand at $122.8 million. That middle group there, that is a deadly group. And then in fifth place, I forgot actually that The Little Mermaid last year takes that #5 spot as the 5th highest grossing Memorial Day weekend film at $118.8 million. So in the last few years, 2022 and 2023, we've added movies to this list. I don't foresee either Furiosa or Garfield joining this list. I mean, stranger things have happened, but I just don't see either of them overperforming to that point. So we may have to wait till 2025 to see if there is another addition or a replacement to that list. And let's take a look at the week ahead and the movies that you'll be able to see if you want to kick off your summer with a trip to the movie theater. On Wednesday, A24 is continuing their remastered re-releases of some of their films in IMAX. I went and saw Hereditary a couple weeks ago. This week, they're putting out Uncut Gems in IMAX for one night only on Wednesday night. I love that movie. I don't know if I could handle it in IMAX. I could barely handle it in a regular theater. And then, of course, opening this weekend, we have Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, the long-awaited follow-up from George Miller in his Mad Max series. We also have the Garfield movie, which I actually saw today as I'm taping the show, and you can see my review of it tomorrow on Tuesday morning. Also in many markets is the latest from Angel Studios. It's a movie called Sight, and it stars Greg Kinnear and Terry Chen in the true story of a man who fled China and went on to become an eye surgeon. So Angel Studios continuing to try to expand their theatrical footprint. And then in very limited releases, a movie called Hitman, which stars Glenn Powell. He co-wrote the screenplay with Richard Linklater, and then Richard Linklater is the director of the film. It's gotten some really good buzz, but it is, as I said, a very limited release. Most people will be able to see it when it hits Netflix on June the 7th. And that does it for Charts with Dan this week. I know we've been doing this run of Monday shows, but I think I'll probably do the show next week on Tuesday because I want those Monday estimates for the 4-day Memorial Day weekend box office. So stay tuned for this show next Tuesday so we can look at the entire long weekend. And of course, stay tuned right here to the channel. I've got my Garfield movie review coming out tomorrow because there was a public early access screening that happened yesterday on Sunday. I'm going to be seeing Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, as soon as I can, and I'll probably have my review for that movie out on Thursday or Friday. And then, of course, movie news and reviews. I just put out a big video about X-Men 97, which I really, really liked. It's more of a video essay style review, so if you want to check that out, I'm really proud of that video. And then you never know what news is going to break that we can talk about right here on the channel. It's a big adventure, and thank you for going on that adventure with me and for watching the show. Thank you also to our sponsors, The Perfect Gene and Miracle Made. You can find more about them in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.